So do we have a topic for this week?
I think you had proposed a topic in Basecamp. You proposed something about sprinting and holidays and accounting for holidays in your sprint planning, I believe, was the topic you suggested.
Yeah,
Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will. So, but you're not. So,
any moment now.
right, it'll happen. So the question is like, how do you look? Everybody's going to be gone next sprint because it's a holiday, right? And how do you make sure you've got the right? How do you scale back your forecast or commitment or whatever verb you're using in your Scrum team to make sure that you don't bite off too much when people aren't going to be here? And
How do you scale back your verbs?
Yes, exactly. Use smaller verbs because you can't verb as much during this holiday sprint. And my high level thought is,
How is verbing not a verb?
well, that's a linguistics show outside the scope of here's this Agile thing. Hey, everybody. So my high level is, look, you on some level, whether you have velocity and story points or you have throughput and flow metrics or whatever, you've got an overall kind of average sense of how much you can do as a team, right? High level, look at the next sprint that's going to be shorter or smaller or whatever, fewer people around.
Mm-hmm.
Figure out what the proportional drawdown or shortfall is going to be in terms of the team's capacity,
Mm-hmm.
and shrink your sprint backlog by the same proportion. Maybe you can do that with numbers.
I think the maths could come into play there,
Yeah.
and without too much. Although it isn't a straight conversion. Like if you lose an entire role on the team, like all the developers will be gone, for example.
Yep.
Right? Then there's probably not a lot of development work that's going to get done, regardless of what percentage of the team remains. So so you'd probably start looking for things the rest of the team could do to remain engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The risk of using numbers is the same as with all estimation in Agile. It's like it gives you an illusion of precision, right? And so be careful about that, right? Still gut check it,
Mm-hmm.
but you probably want to use numbers on some level just to make sure everybody is thinking about it the same way and there's some rigor around it. So what I heard, this was interesting. Somebody mentioned this proposal. Let's say they wanted to convert it to person days. What do you think of that? So, right, Jeff's eyes get big, right? So imagine that
Convert
you've
what to person days
let
first, and then
me just give you the scenario. So let's say you're using 2-week sprints, right? So there's 10 days in the sprint.
Maybe.
Yes.
Okay. Let's say there's 5 people on the team. What do you mean maybe?
What if you work in a non-weekend zone? What if
there you go, exactly.
What if you've got an organization that does 4 10-hour days instead
there you
of
go,
5
exactly.
8-hour days?
Exactly.
Math.
Yes, but you could. So what I'm trying to do is describe the pattern. Then you could deviate from the pattern.
Sorry,
right?
I interrupted.
That's fine. That's fine. So
That's okay, because we always interrupt you, and that's
no,
fine.
you don't.
No.
So 10 days in the sprint, 5 people on the team, 50 person days, right? Let's say the team's doing 100 points per sprint because you have a velocity. That's what you're doing, right? Let's say in the upcoming sprint, there's only 7 days in the sprint because there's 3 days for holiday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 people are going to be gone. So 7 times 3 is probably 24, 21, whatever. Math in public. So you have essentially you're getting to the proportion difference, the proportion discount, right? And so then you just you take the number of points out, right? Is that useful? Is that helpful? Is that confusing?
Well, are we one step then away of saying, why don't we just use the person days in the first place, and then we could just count how many person days we have and take that many story points? Which is where you lose me.
Yeah.
None of that feels right, I'll be honest with you. and here's why. Any number of things can go wrong. Any number of things can happen in those days. And so you're trying to assign a number, a quantitative amount here, but you have no idea what kind of complications they're going to run into. And so I would rather have the team talk, what a concept, and say, well, let's see, we got about 5 days or however many days we really think. And so and so and so and so, and oh, and that other person is going to be out. So who do we have? In other words, let's do our capacity evaluation amongst ourselves. And if it turned out, you only had testers or you only had one developer, let them figure out, all right, what can I reasonably get done? Reasonably, operative word is reasonably, get done in the holiday week because, oh, by the way, even though I'm working, I've got shopping to do.
Yeah. My
They
kids are going
know
to be
their
home, so I'm
capacity.
not going to be able to focus. So this is an interesting thing. When we, okay, you go ahead, Matt.
I was just one quick follow up. So what I hear you saying, Jeff, is take the numbers out. It's going to be a subjective sort of a gut check, right? And so the team will decide based on their subjective sense of what they'll be able to do. My question is, like, let's say you have a team that has a pattern of overcommitting, and the numbers help them to get some sense of when they're overcommitting.
If they're using numbers, are they no longer overcommitting?
Yes, let's say that they are.
Okay.
But that the numbers, even though they're not precise, and it's a leaky abstraction, but it allows them to get a better sense of when they're overcommitting.
Okay.
How do you help them in that discussion to see that when they're trying to break that pattern of overcommitting?
Well,
And all they have a subjective sense.
This is what I was gonna say, and I think it answers your question. When we first start with a brand new team, we have no conception of what they're capable of achieving, right? And so to plan those sprints, we tend to use what I refer to as the pain-based method of selection, right? Where they talk about the first story in sprint planning, they discuss what the implications of it are. Can we deliver this one in this 10-day period, in this 2-week sprint? And they very often will say, yes, of course we can do that. And then you say, okay, what about this next item on the backlog that we've already talked about? And it's already met our definition of ready, so we know what's in it. Can we do the first one and the second one in that 2 weeks? And you work your way down until they start going, not feeling confident about that. And then you talk about a few more just so there's something waiting in the wings just in case they're under committing. But you don't put those into the sprint. You just make sure they're ready on the launch pad and everybody understands them.
Top of the backlog.
All right. So, yeah, top of the backlog. I do find that once we establish velocity for teams, they have a tendency to stop doing that. They start thinking, instead of, oh, well, we'll just take 20 points because we did 20 points, or we'll just take 50 points because we did 50 points. Instead of replaying that scenario from time to time, if not all the time, like to say, and then use the velocity as a gut check, right? Where we've got an average velocity of around 20. We're approaching 20 points. How are you guys feeling about this? Or when they get to the point where they say, I'm no longer comfortable with this. How many points is that? And then you say what that is. Well, what's our average been? Well, it's been 20. Oh, yeah, maybe we should dial that back one. Or, oh, I guess maybe we should consider taking another one. They could use it as a guidepost that way. They're still thinking through the stories. They're still trying to make that commitment to delivery together. So in that sense, Jeff's idea would work great because you spell out, this is what we've got. This is the people who's going to be there. What do we feel comfortable taking on? That's what I think.
I prefer, and it's not about me, but I think it's my experience that when people start fixating on the numbers, it starts to skew their judgment.
Agreed.
And frankly, I try to get them moving away from this over reliance on the precision of estimates because it's like you said,
because
it's an
it's
illusion.
Yep.
mm-hmm.
I guess really the question is there any role or any utility or any value in using numbers, uh, right? Or should we just throw them out? I mean, Ron Jeffries has apologized to the Agile community. I don't think he was kidding for coming up with the idea of story points. But flow metrics, right? Does it change if you go to flow metrics and just say, oh, every PBI, every story is going to be as small as possible and just count
But
the
you're
number?
still
Because then,
making a metric. You're counting just a number of items.
yeah,
And I think that if you have a mature enough team, they go a little bit toward the concept of uniformity in size. They start normalizing around certain size items
yeah,
as because they're reliable, that they can deliver those reliably, and so that becomes their go-to size.
yeah,
I've seen that a few times where it's just like, oh, hey, this one feels like a 5, which, you know, we're not really good at doing those reliably. Why don't we break this down a little bit more,
yeah.
right? To get it more into that sweet spot. And then if they are at that point, then yeah, just counting items on the backlog is fine. But maybe counting items on the backlog is fine anyway. I don't know.
Well, there is. I mean, so we're talking about what happens in the delivery teams, right? And that's part of the context. The other part of the context is there's a business, there's plans, like there's some need for predictability, and some cases there's a roadmap, and there's a question of when is my stuff going to get done? When is this thing going to
Yeah,
launch, right? And so we need some way to communicate to the business. Here's a reasonable guess about
right.
where this thing, because it's a complex
A forecast, if you
so
will.
yeah, forecast is exactly what I would say.
It's
But there's uncertainty here, so that but like when the hurricane is going to hit the shore and where is it going to be, we need some way to intelligently talk about what the sort of range of possible future outcomes are. Right, flow metrics I think is the most sophisticated way to do that. Does it? I mean,
well,
as long as you say this is a forecast, it's not precise,
but is
but there
flow
are
metrics going to take size of the work item into account, or is it only going to take number of
no
work items into account?
number of work items. Yeah,
Because I know as I and you know, a lot of this is skewed by the fact that most of the teams we're working with are new to this, right? So we're trying to find ways to help the teams that are new to it. The teams that are getting experience should theoretically be developing their own improvements to what they're doing. And so if they decide we don't need sizing's not helping us anymore, we're good at gauging an amount of work.
yeah,
Um, then I think that's probably fine. The thing that I'll keep running into is people going, well, how can I break this work item down into something that will fit into a sprint when it's clearly going to take me, it's going to take us longer than that. And it's not complete without it. And you want it to be complete there. And so they fall down the rabbit hole of despair
yeah,
or excuses,
yeah.
the
But
rabbit hole of despair.
that is a separate thing. That's a slicing discussion, right? It's how
Yeah.
to make sure you got value, even though when it's yeah. The thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go on.
I was just going to say the thing about flow metrics that I've heard and said is that like you still have variation, right? But the variation doesn't. It's not that much, and over time it sort of averages out. The can't remember who said this, but like you think about the analogy of a wood chipper, right? I mean, if you throw wood
Steve
dust into it,
Buscemi? No, I know
no,
he was in the wood chip.
that is the reference that typically comes to mind. Thank you. But the way you think about the way a wood chipper works, if you throw wood chips or wood dust in there, it doesn't really work. If you throw the entire tree in there, there's certain boundaries to the range, but within those boundaries, right? Small, larger, whatever, like it all flows through, and over time it averages out. And so
It's interesting. I've never thought about putting the sawdust back into the wood chipper.
It's just a way to.
That's an extreme example,
It's an
even smaller branches, but once again, I digress.
Yeah.
You know, when we're working with flow metrics, we're trying to teach teams that smaller is better simultaneously. And by using flow metrics, they are going to naturally, because they know they're being measured now on throughput. And so there will be a natural inclination
Yeah.
over time,
Yeah.
not immediately, but over time, there's going to be a natural inclination to game the system. How do you game the system? Well, let's just make these smaller. Well, thank you very much. That's exactly what we were trying to get.
Yeah, by making them smaller, you get more items in your sprint. Therefore, your throughput looks higher, as opposed to we took one big thing that we refused to break down any further. We finished one. And now somebody's looking at me, raising an eyebrow, going, what did you do this spring? Well, we worked on one and we didn't finish it.
Yeah, I don't love the culture of the team trying to make themselves look better by increasing their
No.
throughput. But I do agree that it is a dynamic that we see. And also, if those are the incentives, it does take us in the right direction. It aligns us. As long as it's valuable and testable, break it down as far as you can, is what I would say.
So I know what I just said sounds maybe somewhat Machiavellian, and maybe it is. But here's the thing. Human behavior is what it is.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with human behavior all the time. We already know from Goodhart's law and all the other things that people are going to hew to the metrics that they're being measured by, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
And so then if that's going to be the case, we're not going to change that human behavior.
Right.
Probably not. And so what can we do? Let's do some things that at least mold those behaviors towards things that are valuable, like breaking things into smaller pieces.
Encouraging effective behaviors we want anyway. Yeah, totally.
I've used the phrase, but I didn't know it was Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes the target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Right. I talk about velocity or throughput or whatever, like your oil temperature in your car. The point is you have one, but you shouldn't care what it is. You should care about where the car is going, the value of where you're going, right? It's really just like it's within a certain range. And as long as it's within that range, it indicates the system is healthy. Who cares what the number is? You need to know if it's too low or it's too high because there's something in the system you have to attend to. Other than that, nobody cares where your oil temperature is or your velocity.
Can we extend that analogy then? Well, because there are people, like if you've ever known anyone who was big into the hybrid vehicles, they were into hypermiling. They were trying to get the most gas mileage out of their car.
Yeah.
So they were constantly monitoring speed and brake usage and all this. And it sounded, honest to God, they made it a game because that level of attention to detail of driving your car would drive me insane. So I appreciate that they were willing to keep themselves amused as they drove. But is that not akin to looking at a team and constantly trying to fine tune and adjust and saying, oh, you could be doing that development a little bit more efficiently, or you could be just eking out just another couple of miles out of the gas tank.
Focusing on the velocity, in other words.
Yeah.
So in that case, in the scenario of a hypermiler, it sounds like the value is the efficiency, right?
Yes.
So maybe that is the thing.
More so than the getting there.
So yeah, exactly. So the analogy would be for a Scrum team, if they made their velocity maximizing the velocity, if that's the valuable thing, then I guess that's what you focus on.
Right.
But
and that would match Goodhart's law, because that's maybe
the target becomes
the target is now the important thing.
Yeah. No, we're assuming that we're building stuff that will drive more revenue, less cost, reduce risk, pay off debts, right? There's a value beyond some artificial measure of how fast, some output metric that we can use to.
And those metrics really are there. It's like, I don't think velocity is useful outside of the team context. The team can use it to gauge their own performance. They could use it to say, are we taking enough an amount of work equivalent to what we've done before, right? Like the part that we can generally deliver at value consistently, right? You would think they would want that as well, because then they're not being forced to put in more time or work at a pace that is unsustainable.
Totally.
Right? We want them to get to a steady state. The trouble is that when we talk at the beginning about steady state, we're going to get to a steady state. They're going to take an appropriate amount of work. All the business hears is less. I'm going to get less.
Maybe unless we reframe it to the valuable outcomes and they're the business. So the business says, hey, I need this report by this date, and they get it or not. If they get it, right?
So here's
we-
the thing. The business is getting less anyway. That's the problem. Their teams are overpromising and under-delivering.
Yes.
So they're still not getting it.
Yes.
It's just that they have, once again, to your word, an illusion that they're going to get something. But the reality is, in the back of their minds, if they're actually thinking about historical delivery, they know they're not going to deliver. And it becomes this whole mindset. Yeah. You promise, and so they're not getting it anyway.
This is why, you really should focus on how you define the work items, so that you make sure when you're talking about if it's delivered, it's in the way that they think about it, and then you can say, "Oh, I'm getting more stuff that I recognize as value, and I don't have to think about velocity numbers or throughput."
Yeah.
Because you're right, Jeff. They know the stuff that I know that I need for my thing. The way I think about it hasn't been coming fast enough, and now, if we frame it that way, you can see that they are coming faster, and the team can do whatever they need to make sure that happens.
Yeah. Well, at first the reality doesn't match the illusion, and so they feel like they're getting less, even though they're getting the same or maybe more even, but it feels like less because it's less than the original dream.
Well, dream is the operative word there, right? We need to align on like what's actually realistic, what's sustainable. Do we need to increase the overall capacity of the system? Is the system working as efficiently as possible, number one? And then once we have some confidence in that, do we need to increase the capacity of the system?
Okay, so there you're back to hypermiling. So if we increase the efficiency of the system, who is responsible for the increase in efficiency of the system?
Who owns the system, I guess? Ultimately, it would be the business.
Be careful.
Well, if you set it up the right way and you make it transparent, then you can show the business what's happening, what's not happening, and why the stuff that we wish were happening isn't happening, right? The team is doing as much as they can. And if you want more stuff done, you have to increase the capacity of the system. Ultimately, that's what we want to get to, right?
So, I think there was a coded phrase in there, though, when I said who's responsible for the efficiency of the system. So in most organizations, when you hear the word responsible, it's the person who does it, right? As opposed to the accountable person, who's the person who needs to make sure. And I always hate racy discussions, but I'm going to use it now because it works for this narrative. So if you are responsible for the efficiency of the system, you will feel that there are things you should be doing to improve the efficiency of the system. Yeah. I would prefer to see that responsibility in the hands of the people who are trying to be efficient, not the outside imposing efficiency.
That's fair. Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
Totally.
Okay. Jeff, you look amused.
Whenever I hear a discussion start going down the whole racy route, it's kind of like nails on a chalkboard for me. So, but you set the context, and I know you said you hate doing racy, and so that was fine. All right, it's like, ooh.
I remember the first time I heard about that. I mean, I'd heard it used before and I dismissed it as a stupid idea. But the first time somebody asked me about it in a class, they're like, okay, so what's the RACI diagram or what's the RACI chart look like for a Scrum team? And I said, and just on the fly, I said, well, let's talk about that. Okay, so here's RACI: responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So pick a thing. What do you want? Delivery. Who's responsible for delivery? And it's like,
Everybody.
you're right, the Scrum team. Okay, so what? Who's accountable for the? Oh, it's the Scrum team. You know, and we just went down, and I don't think he agreed with me, but that was the I thought it was being really clever as I was
Was
saying
that
it. So,
individual? Was that individual perhaps a project manager?
could it have been? Perhaps it was. Yes, I do believe they were a project manager.
Is that a
And so I
function of
did
trying to manage
end up
individuals?
adding a slide to the deck that said RACI. If you want to talk about RACI, we're not going to talk about RACI.
Is that sorry to interrupt? Is that a function of people trying to manage at the individual level as opposed to saying the basic building block is the team, and the team owns everything?
Well,
I
I
think
think
Jeff
it's
says yes.
I think it is, but it's further than that. It goes back to that discussion about the complexity of the organization and who has had responsibility for different things based on their role, title, rank, and position.
Yeah.
And and I think it's typically relied upon. When it is relied upon, it is relied upon as a finger pointing device, so that when things fail, we know who to point our fingers at. Well, you're the one that was responsible. You're the one that was accountable. In my former life, managing projects, that was the only time. So you can construct this RACI, and when do you ever pull it back out?
When
When
there's a
something has
problem.
failed, exactly.
That's a great
And
question.
so,
When does it actually get used? Yeah.
how about putting the effort into collaborating and talking? Because conversating is not a word.
Thank you.
It is, but
Okay. Well,
it's not a word in my dictionary.
Conversing.
Conversing,
Conversing.
I know.
But
How about
conversating,
putting
sure.
that focus and energy into collaborating and conversing, and instead of pointing fingers when things fail? Things are going to fail first and foremost,
yep.
inevitably.
Yep.
That's just nature.
The point is to
Oh.
not try to the point is not to try to not fail. The point is to recover quickly and adjust as quickly as possible.
Well, when you're doing in a complex environment, if you're doing experiments, you're trying new things, you don't know, you can't predict the future,
Yeah.
you are going to fail.
Failure is
you're gonna
inevitable.
fail. Yeah.
There
The
will
point is
be
now what?
at some point things are not going to go according to plan. And so the RACI diagram is your guarantee that there's somebody to point a finger at when that happens.
But that's not actually helpful.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
not at all.
Who do we flog for this?
Yeah. But then as soon
Who
as
do
you get
we-
done flogging, you have to go back to adjusting.
Except
just
now the
take the
person you
flogging part out.
flogged is kind of,
Yeah, less able to collaborate probably.
yeah, or less willing, or they're going to adjust their actions to make sure that never happens again. And again, it's if it's one of those people outside of the team space, there's nothing they can do anyway other than to inject themselves into the middle of things.
Right.
And disempowering the team.
That's a word.
Okay, good.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. The team has to be sort of a black box in a certain sense, right? Like you pass in requirements, you get out value. And if you try to reach in there,
You should get bit.
you should be reluctant to stick your fingers into a place where you can't see the dynamics and don't know what's going to happen.
It's a black box. It's like an Indiana Jones movie, and he's reaching into the crevice where there's probably spiders and bugs and stuff, and you don't know what's in there. You deserve to get bit.
Well, I feel like we have addressed how to plan for holiday iterations. I don't know. What do you think?
I like
Indiana
it.
Jones edition.
Has this been an Agile thing?
It has indeed.
I
Indeed.
think so.
All right. Well, I'm Matt Beam.
I'm Mike Markey.
And I'm Jeff Singleton.
We will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Have a good
See
one.
ya.